Time to Talk Tuesday, where your local realtor, Antonio Newton, discusses the local market and common issues, providing quick solutions, creative ideas, as well as tips for investors, home buyers, and homeowners.
Hi, my name is Antonio Newton, your local realtor with the Newton Group at Coldwell Banker. Welcome to Time to Talk Tuesday. I'm so glad you decided to join us for this episode. This is one that many people have requested. And today we're talking about the contract. And we're actually going to go over a copy of the CCRA's contract. This is part one of a two-part series going over the contract. Now, before we dive into today's information and start going and diving into the contract and what the terms and lingos mean, please don't forget to check out all of our video content on our YouTube channel at Antonio Newton Realtor, and also our Facebook page, which is Antonio Newton Realtor as well. There you can find all of our video content for Time to Talk Tuesday episodes, After Coffee, which is our interview series, Home of the Day, and a lot of informative information. And don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, and hit that button so that way you get notified anytime we drop new content. But let's dive right into today's episode. Obviously, the contract is so important whenever you're thinking about a residential transaction, especially from the buyer's point of view, especially if you're a first-time home buyer. You know, you probably hadn't seen this contract before. You may not be familiar with all the terms. And anytime it's a contract, that is a legal binding document. And when there's discrepancies or when there is an issue, oftentimes those can be settled in court. And we definitely don't want that. So to prepare you so that way, when you make a decision on buying a house, there's a lot going on emotionally. And the better you can understand the contract, that's going to alleviate some of that fear and some of that apprehension. So not only you can make a good, solid, quality offer, but then you feel confident in what you're doing. So let's just jump right into the contract. Now the contract, this is, once again, there's a state contract, but this is the CCRA contract, and I am not an attorney. So if you have any questions, please consult. But being a real estate agent, we are equipped and have the fortitude to be able to go through the real estate contract and explain its terms and meanings to you. So let's go through now, starting on first page, page 1. So if you notice, it's a contract of sale. So this is what you would use for residential. This will be a resale. Most new construction homes, the builder is going to have their own contract that they're going to want you to use. So once again, at the top, you see the first section says the buyer or seller is licensed under the laws of South Carolina as a real estate licensee. So full disclosure. So if the person buying the property or selling the property is a licensed real estate agent, then they have to disclose that information to you, and they would check whichever box would apply. So that way the other party would know who they're working with. Then section 1 is just the parties. So you got the contract date, which you'll put right here. And then you have the buyer's names, which will go right here. So if you have multiple buyers, both buyers' names will go on this line. And then the seller's name, once again, if you have multiple sellers, will go on this line. And then if you look at the, go down, buyer acknowledges receipt of disclosure of relationship brokerage form, and they are a customer or a client. So in real estate, you're either going to be a customer or a client. Of course, a client, you get client level services, which include, loyalty, obedience, accounting, handling with reasonable skill and care, helping with negotiating, pricing, things of that nature. As a customer, we are still entitled to give you some duties being a real estate agent in terms of disclosure, but we don't have to give you any of the client level services. So it's important that you know if you are a client or a customer to the real estate person that you're working with that's helping you write this contract. And it's also important that you understand the difference in what level of service that you're getting. So as a buyer, the only way to be a client is to fill out a buyer agency agreement. And then as a seller, the only way to be a client is to have a listing agreement filled out. Section 2 describes the property. It's pretty self-explanatory. the subdivision address, city. There may be a unit number. If it's a condo or townhouse or anything like that, you put the county that it's in, you put the tax map number. The more information you can fill out that you have, you may not have the lot, the block, the phase, but the more information you can fill out in regards to the property, the better. And then number 3 is, of course, price. Now, this is going to be your offer price. So this contract is how you make an offer to buy a property. So putting this price, this is your offer price. Now, they'll be able to either, 1, reject it, counter it, or accept it. But your price is going to go here. And then section 4 is earnest money. So earnest money is once again paid whenever you make an offer. Sometimes it's delivered after everything is accepted. That depends on how you and your agent decide to negotiate that. Section B is if you're going to give any additional earnest money at any point in time. Sometimes after inspections, people will do that. You can certainly do that, and that will be done in this option. And then C is who's going to hold the earnest money. Is it going to be held by the seller's agent? Is it held by the buyer's agent? Is it held by an attorney? So that would be on that line. So you know who is holding, as a buyer, who is holding your earnest money, where it's at. Now we start getting into the contract. Everything has been self-explanatory, but look at section D. Escrow agent does not guarantee payment of funds accepted as earnest money. All earnest money received will be deposited as required by South Carolina law and the South Carolina Real Estate Commission's rules and regulations. If earnest money is returned because it is a fraudulent instrument or due to insufficient funds, the agent holding the earnest money will immediately notify the other agent and the contract may be voided. So if they write you a personal check and that check gets bounced, they can void the contract, which means you don't have a deal. But as you see, what's in bold is really important here. And it says, buyer agrees to and understands that the earnest money may be deposited in an interest-bearing escrow account and that he has the right to the ownership of the interest accrued. Buyer, through this written agreement, relinquishes ownership of that accrued interest to the escrow account. So even though you have the right to it, by signing this, you're saying that if the earnest money is refunded, you will just get your earnest money back. You will not receive any of the interest that accrued on that earnest money while it was in that trust account. Once again, going through, earnest money deposited in an escrow account will not be released to either party until confirmation is received that the funds have cleared the bank, and if a dispute arises between the buyer and the seller concerning entitlement to in the disposition of the earnest money deposit, the deposit will be retained in the escrow agent escrow account until escrow agent has obtained a written release signed by buyer and seller consenting to its disposition or until a disbursement is ordered by a court of competent jurisdiction. So what that's saying is if you don't sign any other addendum, which addendum becomes part of the contract, then this earnest money, if there's a dispute, they can't release it to the buyer or to the seller without both parties being in agreement and signing the form. And if no one signs the form, then the only way they can release that money is, as it says, if a judge is ordered by a court of a competent jurisdiction. So you would have to go to magistrate court or small claims court rather to get this issue taken care of in terms of who would get the earnest money. And remember, earnest money can also be, so if there's a dispute and you guys can't agree, you can split it up. If it's $1,000, say, okay, the buyer gets $500, seller gets $500. But whatever it is, unless there's an addendum signed, it's going to be agreed upon by both parties. So if one refuses to sign, then they can't release it to the other party. So that's important knowing that. So depending on what you put down, if there's a dispute, you may not be able to get that back as quickly as you think. There are ways to get around this as well, which that's another discussion for another episode. And then, of course, you're going to initial and date at the bottom of each page to make sure you went over each page. So going on to page 2, now we're talking about transaction costs. So transaction costs are also closing costs. So here you have option A and B. So option A would be that the buyer will provide or pay for all of the buyer's transaction costs, and the seller will provide or pay for all of the seller's transaction costs. And then option B is if the buyer is going to ask the seller to pay for a portion of the closing costs. So that portion would have to be put on this line right here, and you would have to put a dollar amount. So you would have to say $3,000. You can't just say, they're going to pay for it. You have to put an amount. Now, if the buyer's closing costs, if you ask for $3,000 from the seller and closing costs end up being $3,500, that means the seller would pay $3,000 and the buyer would have to bring the additional $500. Now, if you ask for $3,000 and your closing costs only end up being $2,500, then they only pay $2,500. You still can't get $3,000 and put $500 in your pocket. So it's important to try to, where the realtor works with the agent or the lender, if you're going to ask for closing costs, so that way we're maximizing your buying power and we're not leaving any money on the table for you. Section 6, financing. So buyer's obligation under this contract is or is not contingent on financing. So if you're getting a loan, this is a contingency that you have to get the loan in order to buy the house. So that way, if something happened where you didn't get the loan, you wouldn't be obligated to buy the house. Okay, now this contingency does expire 5 days prior to closing, as it says right here. So that, once again, it's good to make sure not only do you have a good realtor, but you have a good lender who's working at you as well, because they could also cost you money. That's why communication is so important between all parties, between you as a buyer, the lender, and the realtor. So that way everyone stays on the same page moving forward towards closing. And if it's not going to close, that we can do things in a timely fashion so it doesn't cost you any of your earnest money. So then you also have to put in 6A, you have to put the financing type. So it's going to be a conventional loan. Is it a FHA? Is it a VA? Is it USDA? Is it South Carolina State Housing? Is it seller financing? And then, of course, there's a box for cash. And then you have other, if you were going to do some other form of financing, like if you are getting a home equity line, a HELOC loan to buy something cash. Technically, it's not cash because you still got to get a loan out for that. So that may be checked other right there. Buyer or buyer's agent will immediately notify seller if financing changes. So let's say you are you put conventional and something changes and you have to go FHA. As the buyer, you have to let the seller know because that's going to change the contract terms, and then the seller will have the option to continue to move forward, or they can have the option to void the contract with you as the buyer getting your earnest money back, as it says here. And then, of course, it has a note. So if you utilize FHA or VA financing, a lender's required. FHA and VA addendum have to be signed by all parties. And then Section B under 6A is application for financing. So this is very important. So once you're under contract, you have 5 business days from the date of the contract acceptance to apply for financing from a lender of the buyer's choice. The application will include advancement of any funds required by the lender and providing lender identity to the seller and the seller's broker. So you have to say, we're applying for this house, this is the seller's agent, their broker, this is the property address, and get them all the things we need. And they need 5 business days to get this done. And should you fail to do that, then you could be in default and you could be in jeopardy of losing your earnest money. So it's very important. So that's just breaking down the first part of it. So stay tuned because we're going to have parts 2 coming up next week. If you're interested, make sure you tune in to Time to Talk Tuesday next week so you can see part 2 of our contract episode. Thank you as always for watching and stay safe. Once again, I'm Antonio Newton, your local realtor with the Newton Group at Coldwell Banker.
This episode of Time to Talk Tuesday was brought to you by the Newton Group at Coldwell Banker, where nothing works until we do. Look for our episodes every Tuesday where Antonio Newton discusses the local market and common issues while providing quick solutions, creative ideas, as well as tips for investors, home buyers, and homeowners. If you'd like to reach out to us, we can be reached online and on land at area code 803-608-2597. So until next time, here's wishing you all fair winds, following seas, and gentle tides.